Archibald!
Good afternoon, Legionaries. This is General Lance and Sergeant Barnes, and today we are joined with a very special guest here. We have Adam Smith from Myth of the 20th Century, and we are just sipping some pina coladas off of my U-boat off the Isle of Formosa, and we're just talking about some stuff. But before further ado, welcome, Adam.
Thanks. Is that Taiwan, or are we in a different decade?
No, that's absolutely correct. We're in a different century, okay? It's Formosa, okay? And it's not Beijing,
wow.
It's Peking, okay?
Oh.
No,
right.
no. But in all seriousness, though, I think you and I have been tracking as far as the different conflicts that are arising on the horizon. The great power politics, the economic tribulations that are on the horizon, all the kind of different vacillations and flexing of muscles and so on and so forth. And I don't know if you've experienced this, but you go on Twitter or you go on social media in general, and the perception of war is almost as if it's a blend between, conventional warfare of World War II, presaging a conflict with us in China, or it's this atomic hellfire and we all die. And there's no in between. And frankly, obviously, both of these perceptions are incorrect, and only until recently has someone actually put it to pen to paper and explained it with more credentials than I, what the ramifications are. But I mean, is that something that's come across your mental horizon, and what are your preliminary takes on that?
Well, I assume you're focused on the McFate book.
That's right.
The new rules for warfare. There's a book called the new rules of warfare, and it's by somebody else. So just wanted to make sure we're on the same page. I read it. It's good. I agreed with most of it. And some of it is obviously prescriptive, not descriptive. So the prescriptive stuff, you either sort of just take it as a correct strategy, or you can sort of quibble on that, but the facts are the facts. And the description part, for the most part, I agreed with. The only thing I would say about it, as he was sort of retrospectively analyzing how the U.S. military is set up, is he seems, correct me, but he seems to think that the Cold War was sort of a mirage, or that the Soviets were not as dangerous as perhaps we were all taught. Now, there's probably some truth to that, but I would not go so far as to say that the Soviet Union did not have a lot of firepower, because I think they did. They had a lot more nuclear weapons at the peak of the Cold War. At least they had more than the U.S. did, and I think that was not something to fall asleep over. So the fact that the United States arguably prevailed, at least strategically from a military standpoint, I think is something that I think should not be downplayed. And it seems like he does that a little bit. Now, I kind of agree that the War on Terror was a disaster and fought really terribly. And probably I think his main argument that I would agree with is that the Cold War apparatus that was built after World War II and, fought or used, somewhat in these proxy wars, maybe not as an all-out full-scale war against the Soviets, but Vietnam, Korea, etc. Those conflicts were built in a certain way of thinking and framework, and then that got all sort of pushed aside when the Cold War was over for 10 years, and then 9/11 rolls around, and they kind of throw the old systems at this kind of new type of paradigm. And I think that's his sort of observation, that the conventional quote unquote the folded gap, strategy of the Soviets going through Germany or something. It doesn't quite work when you're dealing with guys in sandals living in caves. If I can, distill it. And then he kind of goes on to what to do about this, and that's sort of the more tricky part. But overall, it's good, and I think he observes correctly that there's a lot of bureaucratic momentum that is built into the U.S. military apparatus that is a giant waste, and it's not very effective for a lot of reasons. But we can get into that.
No, absolutely, and it's something that I experienced even before I was in the military, during, and then after, right? Is this idea of what war is, and it's one of those interesting things because warfare, as much as people say that there is such a thing as military science, there isn't, right? There really isn't. What it is this kind of nebulous intuition of a thing, and what I mean by this is that America really falls into this trap where we think that winning battles wins wars, and that there are delineations between the civilian and the warfighter, and they're very strange, formalized, or almost sclerotic understanding of what the political is, right? And just to break it down Barney style for you legionaries out there, what I'm trying to say is that the United States is so focused on winning battles it loses wars. And Vietnam is a great example of it, but it's not relegated to that, right? Because we have Afghanistan and Iraq. And what does it mean to win a war? And what is the nature of war itself? I think Sean McFate makes a great example, or thrust, almost with a stiletto straight to the heart of the problem, is that the DoD and American culture as such has developed a understanding of war which is completely disparate from reality. And this reality, of course, is that the political has very little to do with the the formal institutions of power. So, for instance, Congress, the president, where your town city hall is, and has everything to do with the populace. And the populace is the center of gravity for political legitimacy. But what does this mean for war? Is that war, the outcome of a war, is ultimately the strategic imperatives you're trying to place on others, right? It's a battle of wills, okay, and it doesn't stop at the battlefield, right? And that civilians are themselves warriors in their own right, because what is war if not a continuation of politics? And everyone is political, right? And he explains that the paradigm of the Cold War, specifically one where we were kind of stuck in this World War II conventional understanding. In the military, we have this understanding or self-conception of war as regular and irregular warfare, conventional and unconventional, symmetrical or asymmetrical. And there's this very funny thing that, like, I talk to a lot of Afghan vets and I talk to a lot of service members, and of course they're very proud of their service, and I am proud of them as well. I think everyone is. However, I think the more lucid among them understand that it had nothing to do with, the fault didn't lay in the warrior or the soldiers or even the military per se. It lay in the ultimate power which orchestrated the war. So really the fault lies in the State Department and our wider culture as such. But what I'm trying to extrapolate from this is the understanding that the way we win war is by securing the policies clearly delineated before we engage in conflict. I think we're starting to see this transition from the Cold War into the modern era, the emergence of what is called great power politics, and the understanding, especially in a now atomic age, that conventional war between two states will ultimately lead into a nuclear exchange. And for those of you who think that's way outside of the parameter of the ROE, let me tell you that Russia and China have it doctrinally to be part of their attack on an operational level to use tactical nuclear devices. And these things are not like massive explosives in the sense of like an ICBM or strategic weapons, but they're substantial, and obviously there is a continuation or escalation of force. And I mean, once you start nuking people and you open that door, I gotta tell you, there's no stopping that. So I think what the Sean McFate is facing, and rather because of the fact that we are in an atomic era and in a non-state actor warfare era, that we are in an era where basically, let's see here, the idea is that basically there are other methods of achieving the policy objectives aside from war. And the PRC, oddly enough, the People's Republic of China Liberation Army, and under these two colonels who I have cited before, wrote this book called Unrestricted Warfare, and is Colonel Wang Xiaoxu and Colonel Kuo Liang. And forgive me if I mispronounce their names, but I think it's important that we mention them by name because they're absolutely prescient in how war is going to be prosecuted. But without further ado, I'll go into details later as to how that happens. But I think what people don't understand is that war is going to take on, or rather warfare, which is delineated from war, is going to take on a very different character than it did in the past. And that ultimately we have to really understand what war is, and that war is actually just simply competition of life. Right, and just between metapolitical and individual people vying for the same resources and competing in a same zero-sum politic arena. I mean, what do you think, Adam?
Well, that's a pretty broad philosophical setup there. I don't know if I could answer that in the current evening, if ever in my life. But when it comes to warfare, I guess the question I ask, and this is not McFate, just keep in mind, is what is the point? Why are we doing this? And I would argue, and he would probably agree, that if we all had sort of a mission that we could all get behind, I think a lot of this stuff would fall in line. I listen to people like yourself, and I read a lot, and I try to wrap my head around all this stuff. It's very complicated, and a lot of this stuff is motivated, I think, by actually very simple things, but the technology that we have today is quite overwhelming. And as you point out, it can quickly escalate to some pretty deadly consequences if we're not smart about it. But fundamentally, I think we ultimately have to remember that we only fight each other if we disagree. And if there's some kind of goal to be achieved, otherwise, I would argue it's pretty wasteful. Some people, I would think, would agree with this, but I think, unfortunately, there's a lot of people in the military-industrial complex that don't actually think this way. They think in terms of their budget and their personnel, and they want to keep those budgets and people under them because ultimately their goal is to have power of status, plaques on their shoulder, brass, whatever you call that. And to me, that's corruption. I think there's a legitimate place for defense. There's a legitimate place for the military, but it has to be in the service of the people. And I really don't see a lot of the wars that the United States has been involved in for quite a long time to be benefiting the ordinary person. And I think Smedley Butler would agree with me on that. But I'm not saying military is bad per se. It just has to be for the good thing. And I would also say that, and I've been just outside of the book because I was trying to get some perspective on this kind of question as to okay, why is the conventional fighting force of the United States not able to win these wars? I mean, we pulled out of Afghanistan, for God's sakes, that was pretty pathetic. I don't know what we gained for that. So that there's your evidence as to, this is sort of pointless. Mm-hmm. But I was trying to get some perspective on what is driving this. And my conclusion, based on a story that actually I heard from the U.S. Air Force, the Missileer, whatever they're called, the forces in, like Montana, where they have all those missile silos. That stuff was set up in the 50s and 60s when the threat of nuclear annihilation was very serious and taken as such. And there was a huge esprit de corps in those people because they felt like what they were doing was important. But there was a scandal, I want to say about 10 years ago, I don't have the exact number in front of me, but where there was a big cheating on one of the exams by one of these groups that was trying to become missileers, the people that basically sit in the silo. And if you've ever seen like war games, like they're supposed to turn the key at the same time, blah, blah, blah. It's a very boring job, I would imagine. And I would not enjoy it personally. It seems like it could very easily be automated, but it seems like they keep the people in there because of the degree of danger and importance of what they're doing. And so they don't want to necessarily put all that power in the hands of a computer. They want to have some human, to potentially intervene if there's a mistake or an erroneous program or something, or hacking. You never know. But so I understand that. But the fact is, these guys have been in these silos for 60 years doing nothing. And I don't think it takes a genius to sort of come to the conclusion that that's sort of a dead-end job. I've never heard of anybody who's been in that job getting anywhere of importance. And so I think the people who do that stuff know it. And they're under a culture where they're under a lot of pressure, obviously, to not make any mistakes. But there's really no career path for them. And so they end up doing stuff like this where they cheat and they kind of lie and they don't really care anymore. And I think that's ultimately what I'm getting at, is that when there's no core mission that people believe in anymore, everything else falls down. If people care, it's not even that you have to be that good. It's do you try? Do you give it your all? I think that's ultimately what's missing. We have a lot of technology. We have the biggest budget in the world, but I don't think people understand why we're doing what we're doing, because I think at the end of the day, in the back of their mind, they know what they're doing doesn't matter. And if it did, I think you'd see a lot better results. That's my opinion.
I completely agree. And I mean, it kind of, I guess, what we call outwardly what's called legitimacy, right? Legitimacy is not just simply who is allowed to do X, Y, or Z official state action, right? Or enforce the law or whatever. But it's also the support the body politic gives to the mission. And what is the mission of the United States? Really, it's, obviously, I guess, I don't even know what it is anymore. I think most people don't, and I think that's part of the process or the crossroads that we find ourselves on a civilizational basis, is that people don't really know what the hell we're fighting for. And when you don't know what you're fighting for, there's no real great call to action. There's no great purpose, and there's no willingness to really kind of dedicate yourself to a great mission. Just as you kind of insinuated prior to this. And so I think that's what Sean McFate explains, especially when it comes to counterinsurgency warfare, is the centrality of the civilian, what we call the civilian. And most importantly, he kind of explains to the reader in a lot more tactful and probably, palatable way, that the civilian, the person who is completely unarmed, children and women as well, are as much a part of the war effort as anyone else, because ultimately, what are you trying to win in a counterinsurgency? Ultimately, their acquiescence, right? Their subjugation or something like that, or something more maybe, completely extirpating them in some cases, of course, and that depends on the circumstance in which you're in. But I guess when it comes to war, and he talks about this in Unrestricted Warfare, and there is a number of different terms because it's very much emergent. The term goes under 5G warfare, which is like 5th generation, but there's this term that I think is the best way to explain what's happening, and it's hybrid warfare. And the reason why I talk about this is because there is a different focus of a war effort when it comes to not simply military, but like political conflict, right? Because that's what war is. If we define war as a political armed exchange, then if we zoom out a little bit further, all competition, especially between states or political actors, is a form of warfare, right? And the way that he explains it is that effectively, information, psychology, using agriculture, for instance, to leverage or coerce or co-opt a foreign adversary or adversary to basically fall in line with your strategic goals is also a form of warfare. And this hybrid warfare is so pervasive. It is total warfare, and it's something completely different from what we experienced in World War II. You and I, when we were kind of being raised up on, I guess movies like Saving Private Ryan, there's a clear delineation between the soldier and those engaged in warfare and those who are civilians who are considered to be off limits. It's almost like it's like a very much a medieval joust. There are rules to war, and you can't do X, Y, or Z, or you get strung up or whatever. And I think the most, if not cynical, actually accurate term is there's no such thing as a war criminal. There's only people that win or lose, right? Because I don't think there have been any war criminals prosecuted by the United States on a kind of I guess a large-scale picture or a large-scale event as we did with the Axis powers after the war. And Sean McFate touches on that, right? Because he says that ultimately the West has become sclerotic and ineffective in dealing with either insurgents and terrorists or whatever, or conversely counteracting Russia or the PRC using less than lethal military tactics to secure strategic rewards or acquisitions, whatever it may be, because of the fact that basically they understand what we don't. And what we don't understand is that everyone is in the war effort and is being fought over because precisely the civilians are the ones that legitimate power, and that's where power is generated and allowed from. I mean, what's your take on that?
Well, you might be right. I don't know how the Chinese and Russian military systems coordinate with each other, even how they're organized, frankly. I know the names, the GRU, the FSB, the PRC, the People's Liberation Army, PLA. How they function, I couldn't tell you. I mean, I've heard rumors. I would imagine that they probably are a little bit more coherent in how they approach things, given how confusing the United States seems to be these days. But I don't know if it's correct to imply that the United States doesn't realize that the civilian is an integral part of the battle. I don't know if that's fair to say that's what you're saying, but that seems to be what you're saying. I know for a fact that there's a lot of intelligence agencies that try to win hearts and minds. I'm not sure why don't you clarify what you meant by that, though? Where you're asserting it seems like that the Chinese and Russians are aware of the importance of
I think
hearts and minds, or maybe I misunderstood.
So that's the interesting thing that Sean McFate elucidates in his book, right? Is this idea that hearts and minds is retarded. It's a dumb idea, right? Because ultimately, you can't win over people by hostile force. All you can do is co-opt or coerce them. And what I mean, what Sean McFate is basically tactfully trying to say, and what I'll say explicitly, is that, how do you say this? That the civilian is part of the war effort and therefore it should be targeted by any means. And that's what
I see. Okay.
The Chinese
you're saying okay.
Yeah, exactly. And the reason why we're not able to rise to the occasion and actually contend for power at the place or the arenas at which they're being contended is because of what we call morals, right? Our liberal underpinnings, which kind of assert certain rights of individuals. You can't target civilian centers. I mean, I guess we're not supposed to, but we did during World War II, and often. I mean, we killed 3 million civilians in the global war on terror. But I mean, we kind of sweep that under the rug. But the wider point that's trying to make is that the Russians and the Chinese do so in a systematic way, whereas we do so because they're collateral damage. And that collateral damage is ineffective, just like it was ineffective in Vietnam. We didn't understand what the political imperatives of that war was necessarily.
I see your point. Yeah, there's probably some wisdom to just being able to do what you have to do. I wouldn't. I'm not asserting anything here. I'm just sort of speculating, but I would assume that the Russians and the Chinese are not intending to kill civilians, but they would see it as a necessary evil, perhaps, if that is what is required. I don't know, though. I would agree personally, just on a moral basis, that you might have to do something like that. I mean, obviously, the United States has done it plenty of times, but don't do it needlessly is the only thing I would assert. But
right.
look, I'm not McFate. I'm not you.
Yeah,
so
no, exactly. No, I completely agree with you, and I think you end up losing the war, right? Like, I have this famous saying, so long as the end justifies the means, so long as the means are not prejudicial to the ends, right? So if you're starting to go crazy, that's too much. But also limiting yourself to a very, very specific, set of conduct, which is what we're at right now. You have to be a hostile insurgent with a gun in your hand to be fired upon, as according to the ROE. Well, what happens is you basically miss the political objective of war. And I think that kind of, we saw that in Afghanistan. We spent 20 years there. We're in enormous amounts of debt. And obviously there are cynical interpretations of that, which I think is half true, which is, we want forever wars because the MIC wants to, or the military industrial complex wants to ultimately turn, profits, right? And I think that is half true, but also there are people who are waged that war with the intention of winning. Both the military and the State Department had intentions of winning. But we're not equipped with the culture of a statesman to actually understand what to get from war and what is the nature of war itself. But I think the reason why I'm bringing this up, and this is just news recently, just before we stepped on the transmission here with Adam and myself when we made port here, is that apparently the People's Republic of China has announced on September 16th that $450 billion is basically going to be divested from the United States Treasury bills, etc. And then, of course, they're going to start selling off in piece over weeks, a certain amount of weeks, a further, I think it's 450 million as well, or 350 million, which is kind of interesting. And I wanted your economic take on that. Does that have any ramifications, and what does that mean necessarily politically?
Yeah, okay. So I hadn't heard of this, so I'm glad you brought it to my attention. It doesn't shock me. It's a little surprising that they would pre-announce like that, if that is the case. I don't understand really why they would do it this way. It's obviously provocative, and I would assume because it doesn't have a lot of economic or at least financial logic to it, and I'll get into why. But the fact that it is so jarring of a number in a statement, I would assume it's for political purposes. And it's obviously meant to either threaten directly or warn the United States or lend support to the alternatives like the Belt Road Initiative, the oil alternatives, trading and basically non-U.S. currency. The petrodollar has been kind of a thing for decades, since the 70s, and so there's all these alternative attempts to get off of it using rubles, for example. They've been doing that since the Ukraine war. The Chinese, I'm sure, are more than happy to use renminbi/yuan. But the first thought I had when he told me that was, that's going to put downward pressure on the bonds that they hold. And so they're kind of shooting themselves a little bit in the foot by telling the world that they plan on selling. It's just like if you have a house or a car and you tell everybody, I'm getting out of this no matter what. It's basically what they're saying. They didn't name a price. They just said, I'm getting out. Well, that doesn't put a lot of pressure then on potential buyers because they know you want to sell. So they'll basically wait for you to lower your prices. So the Chinese are effectively lowering the amount of money they're going to get in return for that stuff, which is why financially it didn't make a lot of sense to me. And that's why it leads me to conclude that it's kind of a political thing. The inverse effect is that when you sell bonds, the interest rates go up because in order to attract someone to buy the bond, you have to like give them a reason. And so if somebody's dumping all this stuff, then if you can get it at a low price, effectively your effective yield goes up. And so the U.S. Treasury then, if they're going to sell new bonds, they have to offer a higher interest rate. So effectively, it also incurs some financial costs on the United States. You could view it as economic warfare. It's not necessarily the most financially rational thing to do, but you could view it in the context of that, perhaps. I've not read a single article on this, so I'm just basing on what you just said. But that's just sort of the mechanics that go through my mind.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because obviously it's the reason why I'm leveraging, or not leveraging, but citing this information is because it is part of the game, right? And when I talk about unrestricted warfare, people don't understand that things as innocuous as maybe, well, it's not innocuous, especially for us who hold down jobs, but the economy certainly can be weaponized. But things which we're not really kind of familiar with, like, obviously psychological warfare, we have more or less understanding, especially when it comes to propaganda and the news and so on and so forth. But things such as, backdoors on electrical, our electronics, or, for instance, weaponizing the weather, which is kind of strange, causing forest fires by basically artificially causing artificial dryness and, setting some deep sabotage wildfires to cause, wreak havoc and so on and so forth. Cultural warfare, which we're experiencing. And you can see this all the way through to the social media outfits. I mean, the United States does this as well, and I mean the most famous case is NAFO. But I mean I think it's important that people understand that the Russians and the PRC does this like in spades. In fact, they're the ones that innovated it, right? And they're doing the same thing right against us, and aimed at changing the political and cultural horizons of our culture. And what I mean by that is basically perception is reality, and especially when it comes to psychology and social psychology, the values that we unconsciously and consciously affirm usually are like delineated or come down to us via things like TV. It doesn't come from books. It doesn't really come from churches anymore. It comes from TV and social media and so on and so forth. And the most interesting thing is that Capitol Hill is exceedingly quiet on the PRC as a rival and adversary, precisely because they actually have a number of different controlling interests, not simply agricultural, but in Hollywood, in news sites, in basically lobbying our politicians, and so on and so forth. These actions that they take is hostile. But when viewed from the paradigm of a liberal society, especially modern liberalism post-1945, we see these things almost as if it's innocuous, as if it's their right. They're individuals who might be PRC citizens, basically trying to extract, personalized, cover, but it's all part of a stratagem. It's unified. And this is what unrestricted warfare is using all these different strategies, things as kind of stupid as like building out Ks in the Southeast China Sea, claiming territorial waters just so they can control the trade lanes, which I don't know if you guys know this or not, but the straits in Indonesia and Formosa, or not Formosa, but Indonesia and what's the one off of Saudi Arabia, the Cape of what was the Horn of Africa? What's that specific place? Oh, this
Hormuz.
Hormuz, that's right. And it's near Iran. But basically using it as a strategic choke point to leverage it and basically get for their country certain power, and they're taking over all over Europe right now. In fact, the interesting thing is, I don't know if you're aware of this, but
who's taken over Europe?
The People's Republic of China. So basically the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP.
When you get a chance, I'd like to hear more on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for instance, one great example is Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom.
That jackass.
I know, but it's interesting that this guy is, by the way, like when I say communist, I don't mean like people say that as like kind of like a boomer, like I don't know, like a slur or something. No, this guy is an unironic 1980s Cold War Trotskyite, self-professed. You can look it up. I mean, until they take it down, but I've screenshotted it. But this guy's a straight-up communist, and he came to power. And the interesting thing is the Tory government previous to him had lobbied for a greater budget to expand their military, right? And the funny thing is, the first thing he did was slash the budget for the military and expand rights of the People's Republic of China inside of the United Kingdom. Isn't that interesting? And the strangest part is that the European Union does not perceive the People's Republic of China as a threat like the United States does, because I don't know really what it is, the game that the EU is playing. Maybe they're just idiots. They're sleepwalking into their own coffin. But there are real political initiatives happening in the real world, and I'll make sure to buttress what I'm claiming here in URLs below, so you legionaries can read into it. Not simply about his Trotskyite present, but also the connection between him taking office, slashing the defense budget, and ameliorating himself to the People's Republic of China government. But what I'm trying to explain to people is that itself is also an act of war. And this is what Sean McFate tries to make plain to us, is that war isn't going to look like Red Storm Rising or these weird Tom Clancy conventional war like fetish stuff. It's going to be effectively what we're seeing now. It's going to be a mixture between conventional war, like in the Ukraine, psychological, cultural, economic, lawfare across many different dimensions, across the internet and in space, in place, and everyone is a target. So, in fact, everyone has experienced this. When they make anti-Chinese posts on social media, you're immediately swarmed by bots that either try to mass report, brigade, or like counter signal any statement that you try to make. I don't know if you've experienced this yourself, Adam, but what do you think?
I don't really focus my ire towards foreign powers, mainly because I think the main problem Americans have is the American government. But I totally believe you.
I completely agree with you, and I'm not making a subjective claim here. I don't want the audience thinking I have it out for these guys or those guys. I agree with you. Why fight a tyrant 3,000 miles away when we have 3,000 tyrants 1 mile away?
No, and to be clear, my loyalties do not lie outside this country. Okay, I just find that the biggest problems we have as Americans, I'll repeat, come from those in charge of this country. It's not to say that the Chinese and the Russians are our friends, because they're not. They would like to see the United States fall apart.
Right.
I don't want that, but I would like to see our government reformed.
Agreed. No, you're absolutely correct. And I mean, I do this because, too much risk to myself, and I'm sure you do it too, but we're both patriots, and we do these things not because it makes us money or anything, but because we feel like you got to step up.
Nope. Just to be clear, no.
Yeah. No, exactly. And so I think it doesn't come from a position of sedition. It comes from a position of actually patriotism. And the most worrying thing to me, though, is that a lot of these people that you consider to be adversaries or adversarial to American interests and the American nation are themselves personally allied, whether it's by corruption or simply incompetence. I'm not sure, and I'm not going to make that value judgment. But for instance, Mitch McConnell is married to the daughter of a PRC mogul, and obviously I can't give you its conjecture as far as how much influence that really means practically, but I think we can safely assume, just as anyone who has been married,
yes,
you're certainly swayed. You're swayed. You have to be.
Of course, at the dinner table, and social gatherings, you're not going to say certain things, and then that will bleed into sort of what you do, because ultimately, you don't want to deal with her at night, complaining. We already get enough of that as men. So yeah, who is it?
She's not going to suck you off if you're like doing a bad house. Did you know that, for instance, Bill Clinton didn't get laid by Hillary Clinton for like months, and she wouldn't talk to him, but she basically asked him to bomb Bosnia during the Yugoslav wars, and the next day he did it. And the interesting thing is they never complained about marital problems again. So one can assume that there is a certain amount of, improper political swaying happening, that happens just as a matter of like human nature, human psychology. And Adam is one of these guys that's super smart, and obviously like he almost approximates Spock in a way, right? But I think I think the most accurate representation of us less ascended beings is that we're animals. And we animals, we're irrational and are easily swayed by simple conditioning and exposure. Which is, one of my main beefs with liberalism as such, is that this internationalism, obviously, it aberrates our ability to be true patriots and pursue policies which are truly American. And I think it shows itself in military adventures that we have for the past, 80, 90 years. Maybe more. Maybe the entire experience of the American government or the American Republic has been marred by this confusion. But I mean, what do you think, Adam? I mean, I know you're like very much a peace guy, and I think that's very good for you. I can't make the same claim, and I say so proudly. But I think I wanted your opinion about that.
Well, it's all relative. I want to make sure that what we're doing makes sense, and I don't, as a individual, go about my day looking, who can I play the knockout game with and take their wallet? I just find that to be dishonorable. Mm-hmm. So yes, as a civilian, of course, given we live in a civilization with civil laws and such, my framework of approaching people is such that I try to look for mutually beneficial relationships. Mm-hmm. Now, when you're dealing on an international scale, I think that logic should apply if possible. However, if you're dealing with somebody or a nation that is an adversary that is looking to do you harm, you have to take that seriously, and you have to deal with them as you would a bully. And bullies do not lay down with kindness. Unfortunately, I've experienced this. They just want more. So you have to stand up to them. And that is where I would say, a strong military makes sense.
Yeah, counterintuitively, being a pacifist or being peaceful invites aggression. Being weak invites aggression. Because, that's how they perceive you, as weak if you're more inclined to pacifism. But this is obviously not to make the case that you should just be going out there clobbering people, whether on a state basis or a personal basis. Justice lies in rationality and proportion of force, right? And maybe I sway to one side or the other, but I've always been a strong advocate for things that obviously make sense. I guess I'm maybe just a little bit more of a hawk than you, right? But I think you're absolutely right, because when you're unnecessarily cruel, and this is something that the Russians struggle with themselves, is that they're perceived and have garnered to themselves a reputation of cruelty. And what does that mean practically is that people don't want to be your friends. People would rather eat shit and die before coming to a salubrious, maybe they don't let, you're not allowed to turn the page. And even though I believe that the liberal international order is more of a threat to Europe than Europeans understand, they still perceive, for instance, Russia to be more of a threat, mostly from the fact that they have been terrible fucking tyrants to their nation and individually in this lifetime for a long time. Even though, practically speaking, I would make the case that they probably would benefit from a détente or neutrality as opposed to adversity, But that's my personal take.
Yeah. Russia's a very unique animal, the bear, as they like to consider themselves as. They're kind of standoffish, but you offend them or cause them issues, and they'll come at you. They're not like Western Europeans. I don't know what really is at the root of that, but as far as I could tell for my entire life and all of the history that I've studied, they're not like the people in the West. It's not to say that they don't have reasons to be on good terms. But I agree that the Russians just take things to a very vicious level. And I've encountered this with dealing with individual Russians that I have known in my life. And it's not to say that I haven't met some friendly and decent ones. I have. I really have.
It's a heuristic.
But I have noticed,
right?
Yeah, and again, it's like, what causes it? Is it genetic? Is it the fact that they grew up in this sort of very poor country where everybody's lying to each other? And I remember, like, I literally met this Russian guy. He was very proud of this, and I thought it was ridiculous, but he was very proud. And he told me, in Russia, if you're not cheating on the exam, you are considered stupid by the professor. And I'm like, what kind of culture is this? I don't understand how good Russians don't see this as a systemic problem. At least that's how I see it, because ultimately it leads to what blew up the Soviet Union. People basically just not doing their work, stealing what they could, and foisting responsibility on other people. When you have a sense of duty and honor and motivation, you don't do those sorts of things. You're cheating yourself when you cheat other people.
Funny side story, but I believe this, by the way, but I think it's true that, so Putin got a master's degree in like petroleum engineering, and like it is very strongly
I'm
alleged,
skeptical of that, to be honest.
It's strongly alleged that he had it completely fabricated, had other people take the exams, and I believe it. And in fact, his thesis sounds nothing like him. And this is not to say that he isn't an intelligent guy. I mean,
he's not. He is intelligent. He's not stupid, but his intelligence is sort of understanding people and politics. Obviously, he doesn't behave like an engineer. He doesn't approach things. He does. He's sort of methodical, but he just doesn't have the personality for that type of thing, in my opinion. Like, he's got a black belt in judo, and he lost his black belt in taekwondo after they took it away. But it's like, yes, Mark Zuckerberg's doing jiu-jitsu now, but he only did that after he got bullied for being a nerd for so many years. But Putin was he wanted to be the bully from an early age. I remember talking to a friend from Eastern Europe, and he told me he read his biography, Putin's biography, and he said that he took to martial arts because it gave him confidence. It gave him this sense of power. And I just read him as kind of that type of guy. I don't see him going to the library to learn about metallurgy or chemical processing of petroleum into distillates. He doesn't seem to be that type of guy.
I mean, this guy's a KGB
I've
guy.
never seen any. Yeah. And that's about people and spying and manipulating and basically
and cheating,
coming up with
stealing,
strategies.
Assassinating.
So I personally, I wouldn't want that to be the final form of my government. I do understand, however, that the Russians were dealing with arguably a lot worse than Putin. I think that's a pretty easy argument to make, that he turned the country around after the oligarchs were basically looting the place. I think that was a travesty. But after he sort of cleaned that up, he sort of then turned this whole enterprise, in my opinion, into his own personal legacy vehicle to rebuild the Russian Empire. And I'm like, okay, I get it. That's typical macho guy thinking, but the time will tell if this ultimately is going to benefit the Russian people. I understand. Look, I don't like what Victoria Nuland is doing in Ukraine. I think it's disgusting. And the Russians don't want that. But they weren't being, the angels either. They were trying to manipulate the Ukrainian government to their side.
And our government too. I mean, as much as people hate to hear that, it's true. The
ultimate victim is the Ukrainians. I think that is the biggest travesty here, is that they're basically being their Flanders in World War I. You ever seen pictures of how the World War I battlefields looked after they essentially were throwing artillery at each other for 3 years? Mm-hmm. All the forests that exist now and used to exist prior to that war that had to regrow over 100 years, it was completely denuded. And literally in Ukraine, we're dealing with the same kind of bogged down garbage that the the French had to deal with, and that the carnage that they went through in that stupid war. And I just think this whole thing is just a waste. It's sad, but I mean, I get it. Both sides have a lot of differences that they need settled. And so that's ultimately why war happens, is like we can't negotiate something. So, okay,
yeah,
all right, well, who's stronger, right? So.
I mean, yeah, and here's the thing is, like, I think people really don't understand. You can look at this guy objectively and still understand, like, Putin is, like, my enemy personally, right? Like, he is the enemy of all Americans. There's no such thing as, like, this guy, like, liking you. He uses other people. He doesn't give a dang about anything else, right? Excuse me. Yeah, I don't want to swear or anything, so I apologize here. But the greater point that I'm trying to make is that, and this is for you legionaries, when you examine war, make sure you're emotionally stepping back and perceiving things as objectively as possible. And of course, you'll never get rid of bias, but this is something I admire Adam for so much, is the ability, that Anglo-autism, to be able to give fair judgment on even an enemy, even the most outspoken enemy. But I guess moving on and explaining what's happening, as Ukraine is a case study, but what is emerging in the Middle East, what's likely going to happen on the horizon here in Taiwan or Formosa.
Can I make a small correction?
Go ahead.
Well, when I said Flanders, technically that's Belgium. So I didn't want to confuse anyone who hadn't heard of that place. Aside from the Simpsons character, it actually is a place in Europe, and it is Belgium. It is close to France, though. So anyway, go ahead.
No, you're absolutely correct. And I think, I guess just kind of recentering here on the main axiom of our conversation, the transmission for you legionaries out there, is that our perception of Putin is very carefully curated, and it is completely non-ideological. And that is something that I think you people need to understand, is that in a great power post-ideological frame, he's not a true believer in anything except for Russia and his power maximization. I think that's true of Xi Jinping. I think that's true of basically every sovereign of a non-liberal state. I think the only states which exist with true believers are the United States and its satellite client states. So, for instance, the EU and so on and so forth. What do you think, Adam, on that?
I mean, just what are the motivations of the leaders of Russia and China? What's the question?
I mean, like, basically, we're in a non-ideological frame now. Right? I mean, would you agree with that statement? Or except for liberal powers. I think liberals are the only ones, and I mean that...
It's all relative. I would say, I would say roughly speaking. I think there is ideology on pretty much any side, because it just helps, your side be coherent somewhat. That's really what it is. It's kind of a credo, right? Like, okay, why are we doing this? Oh yeah, that's why. But I think it's easier to interpret the motivations of the Chinese and the Russians absent ideology, because it does seem to be more selfishly motivated. Now, the part of the frustration, I think, the people like us have with the U.S. government is it's not selfishly motivated, although it is. It just seems to be like at the expense of the citizens. I guess is what it is.
It's always framed to us as a selflessly motivated individual. It's about
which is nonsense. I mean, like your example of Hillary asking Bill to go bomb Yugoslavia is perfect. It's like she was embarrassed by the media highlighting that fat intern sucking Bill Clinton, and she didn't like it, and so she's like, okay, Bill, you need to get rid of this. So I don't know if that's true. That's probably somewhat true. She seems like that type of person, and so does Bill. But the whole, like, why were we told, or what was the reason we were told when that happened? Well, Slobodan Milosevic is the next Hitler, blah blah blah.
Right.
I mean, like, this is the crap that we get tired of. It's like this constant moralizing that is hollow. It'd be one thing if it actually was true, but it
or
just
at
seems
least
to
truly
be very
felt, because I don't think they mean it truly. I think they psych themselves up maybe into believing it, but I genuinely believe
somewhat, yes.
they know it's a smear.
I'm sure they do. Yeah.
They know it's a smear. I mean, it's just basically like how Christians called the enemy the devil. I mean, it's just like it's just, liberals.
Yeah, but all
term.
people do this. All sides have to make the enemy as horrific as possible to fight them. I mean, it's easier when you view your enemy as bad.
Completely,
right?
yeah.
You don't want to hurt your loved ones, right? So it doesn't make sense.
You're absolutely right, and I think actually this is a great point to actually start talking about something very important. But I think especially us Westerners, migrants and the migrant crisis is probably one of the biggest concerns that we have. And it's interesting because the liberals blame Putin for weaponizing refugees, and vice versa. We say that the liberals are the ones letting them in, but the truth is actually right in the middle. Is like, yes, it's absolutely a fact that Putin is using or leveraging the weakness of the enemy, his enemy, which are the liberals, and making them suffer for it. So, he knows, for instance, the liberal West. It's politically impossible to turn away civilian refugees, children, and because they know we're weak. They know that we don't have the stomach to do what's necessary to ensure the sovereignty of our country. He understands that about us, and so he leverages it against us. He does judo, right? He judos against us, and that's something I think most people need to learn. Is instead of attacking an adversary head on, is by leveraging his weight against him. And he uses the liberal establishment against us, right? So, I remember Bretton Woods had this clause that later turned into, of course, the European Union, but there was a provision there because of the fact that they are trying to meet United Nations whatever mandates or whatever, but basically in the event that there are refugees, that all member states of the EU would have to equally divvy up a certain number of refugees, so that way they could offset the cost to the state or the respective states, right? So they could basically shoulder the burden together. But it was never built for infinity humans to come into the economic zone, not be stopped, not be turned around, and then ultimately succumb to the financial and political stress of what's happening. And then he, of course, does two things, right? Putin, through psychological warfare and social media, is basically enervating the extremes of both the left and the right, and then destroying the center by making them just so completely the position just so untenable, right? And he's doing that masterfully all across the West. And I mean, when I say this, I think people need to understand, I'm not saying this is a good or a bad thing. I'm just saying that, just objectively speaking, this is how you end up actually taking over or flipping a country or destroying an adversary in a less than conventional warfare manner. And I think people really don't understand that's what color revolutions are, in the Arab Spring or elsewhere, Velvet Revolution, the Orange Revolution of Ukraine. All that is done in the same way against, of course, Russian or adversarially aligned, client states or satellite states, right? And so I think there is some statement to be made, or truth in the matter, that the reason why Ukraine ever shifted away from Russia was because of our intense CIA American influence in that country, and it's shown by the level of financial and military ties we have with that country. In fact, for instance, the Ukraine provides a black site for terrorist interrogation during GWOT, and this is something alluded to in a book that came out recently called Vanish/Kill, and it's just basically about black ops, black operations to try and find and kill Osama bin Laden. And it's interesting that the United States cannot torture, right? And we have this whole drama that happened about waterboarding. But so what they do instead is send them to prisons in allied states like Egypt, Bulgaria, Romania, and Ukraine to be tortured through what's called advanced techniques. And I kind of just wanted to hear your reaction to that, see if you're surprised at all.
I've heard of that before. didn't surprise me. I don't have a firm conviction on what to do about this. The only thing that I would ask, because I've never really known one way or another, frankly, because I can't really verify the veracity of the source material, but I've heard allegations that torture does not actually serve as a useful means of extracting information. I don't know if that's true, though. But if it is true, I would agree torture is probably counterproductive. Now, if it does serve to get information, that's a trickier question to answer, because ultimately, if you're in a war and your goal is to win, and you are conducting torture as a means to help you win, how is that worse than shooting someone in the head? Perhaps if you debilitate them and don't, let them recover somehow, that could be viewed as worse than death. But ultimately, if something like waterboarding is conducted, I frankly never really thought that was a big deal. I'm sure it's horrific while you're going through it, but does it have any permanent, effects? They're wounded psychologically. Well, that's what war is. I mean, give me a break.
Yeah, exactly. So, I'm not a shit lib, so I hope my audience definitely isn't either. I mean, I think we understand the utility of certain actions.
I'm trying to be honest and fair in understanding what all the arguments are. Now, I can't answer like what good is torture without actually understanding the data. And I don't know what the data is, and I've heard these things like, oh, it doesn't work, but then, well, why do they keep doing it? Maybe it's just to intimidate. That's a theory that I've heard too. But I mean, we've done a couple shows. We did a show on Abu Ghraib, and these concepts came up. So
I mean, it's a deterring effect. I mean, you don't want. It's about being able to plausibly induce pain. It's interesting that torture in and of itself doesn't work, but the threat of torture actually is what induces people to give information. And I mean, I'll go into it on a different episode.
Yeah, I believe it.
But I think, like, bringing it back to the actual locus of the conversation here, I think we're starting to understand that it's the people themselves that's what's trying to be fought over, right? Because it is the people that are the legitimating element or factor of any power. And this could be state and non-state power. And the most interesting thing that Sean McFate says about our current era is that a world in which it is globalized and a post-state kind of environment actually makes it very difficult for threats to be managed. Because during the Cold War, borders and international alliances kept the free flow of people from happening. But in a globalized setting, this is, again, one of the reasons why it's self-defeating, is that ultimately your frontage, your boundaries are infinite. They're infinite everywhere. As the internet is interconnected, there are no boundaries everywhere, and so you're vulnerable in every strata and facet of your political power. And ultimately, I think we're seeing this come to roost in the United States via our politics and stuff like that, because what's happening is that I think these forces are making a very strong case that the elite of my government are adversarial to my personal interests, right? And the interests of people that are actually Americans, right? And at the same time, the people that are their constituents don't see that the the patron-client rewards are sufficient to justify being true believers or political legitimizers of their current order. So what I'm trying to say is that basically they can't get anyone to sign up for the military because even though they, of course, hate, I guess, Americans, these newcomers, they also don't find it worth sacrificing for. And so this is the quandary that globalism finds itself, is that no one cares about them, especially when the philosophy is about not caring itself. And you hear about this idea that comes from the post I guess World War II paradigm of the weak gods versus the strong gods, and the concept that you can't have strong large convictions because, as Hannah Arendt would say, it's basically enticing conflict and disorder. But we're seeing the exact opposite. It's actually inciting violence against us and causing us to be unstable, unwilling to take political action. I mean, I wanted your take on that because I wonder what your thoughts about Hannah Arendt are. They're mostly positive.
I've heard. I've heard the name. I even looked her up recently, and I can't remember anything more about her. So I don't have anything to say about Arendt. But when it comes to recruiting, I mean, yeah, I think we've sort of been scraping the barrel for a while here, and I think it's pretty simple. It's like, you sign up, and you're barked at by this like man in heels, with like fake breast implants. It's just it's a joke. And what are we fighting for? I mean, like, you can even ask the guys in World War II, what the hell did you guys accomplish? I mean, we're coming back home, and your daughter's married to an ancestor of a slave now, and it's like I don't get it. And the motivation to join, frankly, it seems like a lot of these guys do it because they need a job. But historically, and I mean, like, guys in the South, et cetera, it was sort of a family tradition from an honor-based culture where, your son needs to go into the military to become a man, et cetera. And I understand that to a degree. But even those guys are getting tired of this stuff. And so I can speak to that.
I'm definitely one of those guys. No,
the latter, I assume, the honor culture kind of thing.
Precisely. Yeah, of course. I mean, I think it's also like, why would you fight, die, suffer very rough for people and an ideology that not only maligns yourself and your ancestors and you actively every day, but also deprives you of the very reason why you go to the military, which is a warrior masculine culture. At every level, they deny you the catalyst. And that's what people should really understand, what a religion or what an ideology is. It's a catalyst for action, right? And if your ideology impedes that action, there's no impulse for people to, or inducement for people to participate. And go ahead. Sorry if you had something to say.
No, well, I just think I'd like to actually hear your synopsis on Hannah Arendt, because I want to know more. But I don't know if that name is intriguing to me. But the military today and the military of yesteryear are just different animals, obviously. But why? And I think it's because there's conflicting systems at play here. We have, yes, you're pointing out globalism, but the military comes from a nationalist system. It is not a globalist concept. You are fighting another nation state. I think McFate brings this up, the whole Westphalian concept of a nation state as opposed to the church having reign over everything. Like, no, it's a people, and then the government are the sovereign.
Right.
Well, that is what the United States is founded around, the military at least. And now you have this everybody can be American, and everyone's a citizen, and you're an American citizen. That doesn't mean anything. Actually, you're going to get less than the guy who's coming in and you're paying for with your taxes. I think it's a demonic system, but I think it's certainly bad if you just don't want to make it theological, and it's certainly confusing. So these systems that were built with different purposes are at cross purposes now. Who's going to win? Well, whoever is stronger, I guess. But I think globalism is... Look, I don't have any problem, frankly, with getting along with different people. That's fine. I think that's good, actually. But when it becomes this way to subvert the rights of citizens and make them into these interchangeable parts and just be mistreated, basically, I think it is a problem.
I think the enemy presents a false paradigm where it's like either or, and that's completely false. It's just like, for instance, of course I hold my family above everyone, and if it came down to it, I would kill the whole world just to make sure they're safe. But that doesn't mean I'm just going around freaking being a freak, right? It means that like I'm trying to cooperate and live peacefully and in a mutually beneficial way as much as possible. But when push comes to shove, I am pursuing the interests of my larger, I guess, family group or so on and so forth, a nation writ large, right? And so too is this law extrapolated out to things at scale, such as the nation. In fact, is it okay if I read a little excerpt from this book that will probably put a lot of context around what liberal ideology in modern times is and why it is that we believe the things we are? Is it okay?
Please don't ask me for permission. This is your show, so please go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. That's all right. All right, so I'm going to read a place, basically an excerpt, and Adam asked me, basically who is Hannah Arendt, who are these individuals, and what does it mean to be a post-World War II liberal per se? What does it mean when I say the return of the strong gods? Well, there's this great book, and it's by R.R. Reno, called Return of the Strong Gods, and there's this thing called the Open Society, right? And you hear this from Soros and so on and so forth, but remember that it has a more, his antecedent, he picked that up, but it came from something a lot sooner than that, and basically this idea of open society, no borders, no nations, and the reason being that they perceived that these factors are, first, arbitrary, first thing, and second of all, they induce conflict, and that you can completely stop conflict by erasing these things, and the state being roughly relegated to a kind of caretaker, what we understand it to be today, right? Which is why we do things. But let me read this excerpt right here. It's a little bit lengthy, but I think it's important to put context on why it is that the West is the way it is today. And bear with me here. I'll skip around too because I don't want to make it too long. But here I am reading from the excerpt of Return of the Strong Gods by Reno. George H.W. Bush was the quintessential establishment man. His views were moderate and conventional. When he praised open borders, open trade, and open minds, he was relying on an adjective that had acquired entirely approbatory connotation in the post-war West. He could be confident that the term would arouse warm feelings and evoke images of a peaceful and humane future. The sources of Bush's confidence ran deep. While World War II still raged, Karl Popper, a philosopher of science, worked to complete The Open Society and Its Enemies, a 2-volume diagnosis of the civilizational madness that led to the global conflict. That is World War II, by the way. By Popper's reckoning, civilization faces a choice. We can live in a tribal and quote-unquote closed society, characterized by deference to authority and the subordination of the interests of an individual to those of society, or we can break free from the collectivist impulse and build an open society, quote-unquote, one that sets free the critical powers of man, in quotations. The future of the West depends upon choosing the latter, as Popper argues. The enormous influence of the open society and its enemies in the decade following World War II seems at first glance improbable. The first volume is dominated by a detailed and highly critical, even abusive, interpretation of Plato, while the second volume treats Hegel, Marx, and with equal severity. Popper digresses into philosophy of science, metaphysics, and other abstract topics. His prose is full of isms and reads like a technical work of academic philosophy, but Popper structures his treatise to serve a clear political imperative, giving urgency to the twists and turns of his analysis. The imperative is bracingly simple. Never again. Never again shall we allow totalitarian governments to emerge. Never again shall societies reach a fever pitch of ideological fanaticism. Never again shall the furnaces of Auschwitz consume, whatever. This imperative never again places stringent demands upon us. It requires Western civilization to attain self-critical maturity with courage and determination, which Popper hoped to exemplify with his full-throated attack on Plato, the founder of our philosophical tradition. We must banish the strong gods of the closed society and create a truly open one. And here's where it gets good. One of the strong gods that the nations of the West must overcome is the nation itself. We are tempted to imagine our collective life as in some sacred sense, or some sense sacred, giving the community a rightful claim upon our loyalty. Popper regards this as a magical thinking, a form of anti-humanitarian propaganda. Only the individual is sacred, according to him, by the way. The state has limited purposes. Its role is practical, not metaphysical and sacred. The job of government is the protection of that freedom which does not harm other citizens. This is not a simple task. Popper recognizes that harms are complex and their prevention can be difficult, especially when one considers the international affairs. Let me just stop right there really quick. And what's another thing that's important about Popper you have to understand, which is basically a departure from classical liberalism, right? The classical liberalism of Adam Smith or of John Locke is the idea of positive freedom as opposed to negative freedom. And what does this mean? Negative freedom is freedom from things. So, for instance, freedom from the government on censoring your speech, freedom from the government from doing certain things, housing and quartering troops in your personal abode. When Popper talks about positive freedom, positive freedom is basically the assertion of certain rights. So, for instance, the idea that not only should people have access to abortion, but it should be almost encouraged. It should be state-sanctioned and allowed, and you cannot criticize it if you do so. But let me return to the reading, and I'll kind of bring it back to you, Adam, and get your take or your reactions to it. Sound good?
Yeah, sorry for the pause. I had my microphone muted.
No problem, no problem. All right, I'm reading again from Reno. Popper knows that there will always be state worshippers, in quotations, and other proponents of collectivism. They are the cause of the world's troubles, such as people must be dealt with firmly. Anyone who relishes his homeland and history is a racialist, according to Popper. The vice affects more than the German people. It is a present danger in every nation. One can see how Popper anticipates our own era and its paranoid rhetoric. If someone worries about the effects of immigration on his nation's culture, he is xenophobic. If he organizes a political party that seeks to restrict immigration, he is a fascist. And let me give a pause right here. This is what I mean by positive freedoms, is that not only is it important that you're free from things, but there are actually certain actions which are completely off the table and which should induce social and state censure against, which is what we're experiencing in Europe and increasingly at home. Now I'm reading again, okay? So Popper appreciates the allure of the closed society. While Fromm focused on the psychological explanation, Popper sought to expose the intellectual sources of our tendency to give our loyalty to higher truths and greater powers. By his reckoning, the mainstreams of Western philosophy tempt us towards totalitarianism. The Greek tradition, represented by Plato and Aristotle, pursues what Popper calls an oracular philosophy that employs an essentialist method. The ambition of this kind of philosophy is metaphysical, to know the truth, and insofar as truth is known, it must be affirmed, which is to say, obeyed. And I won't read too much because I highly recommend that you actually read it, but the final quote here that I'm going to read to you, so that way you guys finish understanding what I actually mean to say, is what his ultimate goal of his vision of liberalism to be. So both individualist, but also positive individual liberty, right? And there are certain liberties you cannot take. There are certain things which are not accessible. And that means, for instance, the abolition of greater meanings. And he cites the nation, he cites a number of different things, but that critique also extends outward to anything which is a meaning which is supra-individual, right? So it means that basically any meaning or life purpose which is more than simply being a interior home designer or whatever. And the reason why that is such a threat to civilization as such, in my personal opinion, is that ultimately the word civilization connotes this very idea of a collective constituted group, right? And when you do groups, if you dissolve any binding between people and relegate it to simply mutually beneficial individual interactions, there is no glue to hold society, a nation, a community together aside from these kind of very funny little flower ideas that we should do it as opposed to any reason for doing so. Because as you probably understand, for instance, in sexual relations between man and woman nowadays, people are scant to get together because the risk is so immense and the sacrifice is so immense and the benefit is marginal. And especially if you don't see things supra individually, like what purpose is there to have a kid if ultimately it's a bunch of sacrifice and the truth is very little personal gratification, right? There is no economic benefit. It's a huge drain in multiple ways, both physical, mental, spiritual, and many other things. The past, you were able to explain to people, well, you have children because you're part of this greater family, this greater clan, this greater history, this greater purpose, this greater team. But with Karl Popper and the West in general, the intelligentsia, they have dissolved this greater meaning as part of their philosophy. And let me finish with this quote, and then we'll finish it there. So one last quote, and we'll just kind of end it right there as far as the book citation's concerned. So I'm reading again from Reno. A social technology is needed whose results can be tested by social engineering. So this seems to raise an important question. What is freedom for in a liberal, open society? Historically, the West has appealed to metaphysics and religion for answers. Popper is aware of this question and gives an existentialist answer for that sort that Jean-Paul Sartre, Albert Camus, and others that made popular in the early 1950s. We must accept the strain, quote-unquote, of freedom and existential tension that comes from knowing we must decide for ourselves the ends our freedom is to serve. It is up to us to define the truths that we need. As Popper emphasizes in italics, although history has no meaning, we can give it meaning. This self-chosen path will require courage, but it is unavoidable, Popper argues. The very truth about reality itself depends upon us. Facts, as such, have no meaning. They gain it only through our decisions. Nietzsche thought it would take superhuman strength for someone to self-consciously give himself his own truth. Only a strong God, an Übermensch, can mint truths rather than discern and obey them. This is certainly not what Popper wants. His goal is modesty, not self-assertion. He therefore hedges writing about meaning instead of truth. Okay, end quote. And the last comment that I'm trying to make is remember that Popper only allows you to have meaning so long as it's individual and it doesn't impose upon others. But as we know from Nietzsche and through the Übermensch is not an individual in the petty sense. He's not a person as you and I, like for instance Adam is an individual. An Übermensch is a nation unto himself. He is a prince. He has people who work for him. And what that greater meaning is trying to say is basically he suborns and infringes upon other individuals' rights basically constructs greater meanings that are collectivist, quote unquote. And so this is the challenge that we're facing with in Popper, and why it is that the West is basically collapsing from mental AIDS. But anyway, why don't you go ahead, Adam, because I know that you yourself are a kind of convinced liberal in the classical sense, and I wanted to hear your kind of reactions to the the newest rendition, the newest spin on the sans-culottes political philosophy.
When was that written? What you just quoted?
It's the
after the war.
The book is called "The Return of the Strong Gods" by Reno.
Right, but when was it published?
It was published 2014.
Oh, geez. I mean, they're speaking like they watched too many Steven Spielberg movies about World War II. Like, I don't understand these people. Like, it's a religion for them. Like, they view the Holocaust as like this second coming or something. I don't know. It's bizarre. I thought that was written actually after Second World War. Like, never again. Like, I honestly did. This is why this stuff is getting old. That's what Karl Popper
said, by the way. This is what Karl Popper said. Reno didn't write never again. He's just kind of quoting.
Oh,
he's attributing that to Popper.
Fine, but at least he's still citing it. I mean, it's still, you're quoting passages from your Bible, and so that's their Bible. And I don't have problems with people having beliefs. I have my own, but the question is your civilization going to be compatible with this belief? And I just feel like it's a graft. Like, the United States before World War II is different, and I think it's just been sort of mind virused for a really long time now. But it doesn't necessarily have to continue on this path. It just has to kind of get some antivirus software here. It just sounded like, communism, like, oh yeah, everybody's gonna, get along, and if you don't get along, we're gonna make you get along. It's like, wait a minute. There's a lot of contradictions here. So again, sounds like communism.
It is.
I can't.
He comes from a background, by the way, of Marxism in early 1919 himself, and he became disaffected due to the various Bolshevist mass murder type stuff. He's basically a communist light. He's a Fukuyama type,
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, as it pertains to my sort of relationship with classical liberalism, I have a leaning, I guess, towards that, but I don't necessarily subscribe to it. It's basically just something that I am, by personality disposition, prone to operate under. Again, as a civilian, like I approach people as I wish to be approached, and I don't seek to force them to do things. But when it comes to group dynamics, I'm not naive enough to think that like some kind of anarchy is going to work. Like you have to have some kind of framework. So I do believe that a nation state is a organizational structure that I think makes sense. Is that a classical liberal? I have no idea, but it's just how I view things.
Oh, the reason why I said that is just because I think we spoke. I mean, you're Adam Smith, and obviously Adam Smith.
Yeah. No, it's all good.
Yeah. That's I guess the.
But I mean, he wasn't an anarchist, and so this whole like he's a classical liberal. I mean, I don't know if you've read The Wealth of Nations. It's not a very good book. Like it's very confusing and laid out strangely. It's fine. Like I guess it had some key insights, but as a sort of treatise on what to do, it's very rambling, and when people ascribe their sort of view of Adam Smith, I don't really know if they or anyone really knows what he's all about. He was kind of a very strange, eccentric person. It's just the sort of key observations I think that he contributed were, if you continue this bureaucratic micromanagement of your economy, you're going to waste wealth. I think that's the key contribution in a nutshell. The England he was living in at the time was essentially this empire that was trying to put tariffs and little levers and switches and dials on every single little transaction, like tea. I mean, like all these, like, and the stamps, like stamp taxes and all this minutia. And obviously it pales in comparison to today. But we also have computers, which make a lot of this bureaucratic nonsense a lot easier. But his argument was that, your economy is going to do fine if you just leave it alone. It actually will do better. It's not to say that like you don't have rules. It's not to say that you shouldn't have like an army. Like I don't know what people think, classical liberalism is supposed to mean. I don't personally know or frankly care. I think when I think of Adam Smith, it's like, okay, he just doesn't like bureaucracy. He's like, you guys are being counterproductive as opposed to productive with all this stuff. People will do what is in their best interest. And when they're allowed to do that without violence, they will arrange themselves in a very efficient supply chain on their own. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the key insight, personally, for me.
No, and I think that's completely rational. I mean, these people weren't out of their minds. I mean, a lot of the Enlightenment thinkers were just reacting towards overbearing church and, sovereign rights. I mean, especially even in England, which is probably one of the most libertine, mercantile cultures of the 1600s, aside from the Dutch. It's, they had a pretty laissez-faire, but they still, like, compared to today, I mean, it's pretty tyrannical, right? And the idea is that I think what I'm trying to make plain for the audience specifically is this idea that it's almost amounts to cowardice, right? It's this idea that war somehow is just something that we can't suffer anymore. It's almost like a geriatric reaction to World War II. Because remember, World War II isn't the most deadly conflict, at least in the sense of in relation to the population. There have been many more wars that have existed which are in a population basis more impactful than any other. the thing that really
what the 30 years war? Like what's bigger than World War II?
It's the 30 Years War. I mean, men, women, and children killing each other. I mean, for instance, Caesar's invasion of Gaul, and he actually left historiographical evidence, and also almost
Carthage was 100%. I don't know. Were there any Carthaginians that survived?
No,
I'm sure like everyone. A couple did.
Literally. I think they sold a lot of people in slavery.
Just about. But yeah, for all intents and purposes. Okay.
But the greater sense is like, why is it that there's this spiritual malaise? And of course, Karl Popper, the reason why he says never again is because, well, I mean, he has certain reasons of his own. And it's interesting that he is actually an advocate of his own nation state, but not that of others. So you have to always take like this understanding of ideology and stuff in a bad faith circumstance, because that's what they're doing. They're doing it in a bad faith circumstance. They're trying to dissolve ideologically any means of asserting your own will. But the larger point that I'm trying to make, and to return to, of course, the new rules of war, is that the West, if we want to win, and Sean McFate talks about this, if the West wants to win, we have to reassert exactly what it is that will make us win. And let me tell you, it's not Karl Popper, especially because his philosophy is designed as a weapon. It's not designed as a kind of live by this rule that it will be good. It's designed at destroying all higher things of other people, not his own, right? And so what this means, extrapolating it out, is the assertion of a state, the assertion of a ranking of exceptionalism, and this idea that, for instance, equality and universality are farces, and that what truly will carry the day is an idea of exceptionalism, that there is a locus of importance that surrounds us, right? Like, my family, my nation is more important than the rest of the populations of the world combined. And without that attitude, you actually do not come to a peaceful negotiation, obviously fermented and buttressed by force, as you do when you're a slave. And we're seeing that now in Western Europe, where effectively the people are being run over roughshod. Crime is way up, and people are experiencing what is called or termed anarcho-tyranny. And it's hard for me to understand that people really don't get that liberalism is not an ideology. It is a weapon, and it's designed against you, against your interests. And the way that you overcome that, I think, Reno talks about it in his book, is fundamentally irrational. At the end of the day, you have to decide for yourself if you want to survive, if your family wants to survive, if you actually benefit from this circumstance. And I think that's very normal liberal understanding paradigm. Like, do we benefit from this lack of freedom of association, right? Or more importantly, that I think people really don't get, is this idea that, like, people need greater purpose. Okay, like, maybe you can be very intelligent, or maybe very extremely self-confident, or completely naive, but the vast majority of humanity strives to dedicate themselves to a purpose. Even if it's not about going balls to the wall, they do need this greater thing. This, obviously in Christian society it was God. Prior to that, it was either dedication to a philosophy, to the state, to an ideal, something beyond themselves, something that wins beyond oneself. And having only ambitions which are unique to the individual, that are not supra-individual, are like they're farcical, and they're flaccid, and they're not meaningful, they're not impactful. And I think what people don't like, or what Popper recognized, is that it is only in circumstances that there are these great meanings. Great meanings are meaningful because at the end of the day, they also are overpowering and kind of command great passions. And here's where I get Nietzschean on people, is like, guess what? War and peace are just like summer and winter. You can't avoid one or the other, and you'll just end up getting both in a really bad way. And what I guess Reno talked about is that there is no response to the strong gods, that the strong gods are ascendant and there is no check on their ascending. I think this is great. I think this is a very important thing. But to him, who is a little bit of a liberal, like, he wants to find out a way. I guess it's a little bit of a call, to other academics to figure out how to do that. But we're seeing that it's falling flat, and the elections in Western Europe and the elections that we're facing in now in the United States are resounding success in this kind of philosophical battle, this spiritual battle in a very kind of temporal sense, that people want to live for something great, and they're willing to do what it takes. And ultimately, the strong gods will win because the weak gods are meant to be slaves. But Adam, what do you think?
Give me a more pointed question, please.
I guess the greater point that I'm trying to make, do you have any suggestions as far as like what it is that like the future will connote for us as a civilization? Do you have any like obviously I think you're a man.
Oh, is that all?
You're a man on a quest, right, to find answers, but I think philosophically speaking, it sounds like the answer is pretty self-evident, and it's pretty irrational,
I think I agree. What was that last part?
It's irrational. It's not something you can just deduce. It's just like, at the end of the day, do you have the fight in your chest to fight for things that come intuitively, you know?
So that depends on how you define rationality. I think the way I would put it is, do you have passion for something? I don't necessarily think passion is irrational, but it's just a little bit more primal than your sort of cerebral cortex telling you what to do, right? But they both have their place, and irrational is to do something that does not serve you in the long run, is my definition of irrational. Rational is to do what is good for you. But your passions can lead you good places. They also can lead you bad places. And that's, I think, why it's conflated oftentimes with irrationality. Like you're passionate for having orgies and getting drunk, but that can obviously be problematic. And so you need to temper your passions with reason. I think that's what basically most religions focus on, is that is temperance and managing your instincts. But ultimately, why do you get up in the morning? You have a drive, you have an urge to do something important. So I think that's kind of what we all need.
Absolutely, and I think we're going to start wrapping up here on this transmission because it has tarried on a little bit too long. I apologize, that's my fault here. But I think one of the most interesting things that McFate says in his book is about counterinsurgency. And he talks about, like, first of all, he dismisses this guy named General Petraeus, and because he says that winning hearts and minds never works, and it doesn't. I mean, we didn't win in Iraq, and we definitely didn't win in Afghanistan. We only won, quote-unquote, hearts and minds after World War II in Germany, because basically the alternative was getting Sovietized, right? And so, I mean, this was kind of just fell into their lap. But the interesting thing that he says the rules of counterinsurgency that actually work are something that most people don't have the stomach for. And he says this, I mean, obviously outright, obviously ethnic cleansing, right? But he goes on to say there are two other things that can be accessible to liberal regimes. One is internal deportation of populations to make them diffuse. So an example would be of Stalin internally deporting Chechens all across the Soviet Union, so that way their community would dissolve and that ultimately they would stop being a political threat. And then conversely is basically colonization. And this is the Machiavellian idea that if you want to conquer a territory, you have to immediately colonize it. And I think he didn't say it in so many words, but I think you should be able to understand why it is that liberals need these immigrants to come into the United States, is precisely to counteract the political, dilute the political power of the American nation, right? By basically what's called diversity, but really ethnic rivalry within, and ultimately dilute its power. And then, of course, through internal targeted imprisonment and through long prison sentences, you're achieving the same thing that Stalin achieved by basically diffusing the population, or at least the elites or the leaders or the warriors of that population, into managed locales, either gulags or elsewhere. And you see this in the United States, where laws are selectively enforced against certain individuals, and they're selectively not enforced against others. And it always has to do with a cogent policy of making sure that they preempt like any kind of political challenge to their rule. I mean, I wanted your reaction to that, Adam.
I think that's a good take. Yeah, I find myself agreeing with everything you said. So, I can't remember every single word.
I tend to have that effect. It's okay. Many such cases.
Not always, I have to say, but sometimes. Probably more often than not. So, yes, I think the United States is being carved up, and a lot of it is just this subversion that we have from the southern border and elsewhere that seems to never end, and it is being done at the expense of the current population. So what do we, the little people, do? Do we buy more Sean McFate books? I mean, I guess. I don't really know if he actually even talks about this. I don't think he does. This is sort of my frustration with these military guys, to be honest. But I think he's right. Like, we live in a sort of nth generation, n being like, a number, fill it in, nth generation war that is different than before. We don't have these people carrying flags with uniforms. Obviously, we're dealing with this kind of very diffuse, complicated information, cyber, demographic, political war. And what do you do? I don't really think the Pentagon is going to solve this for me. So what do I do? What do you do? What do we do as a sort of disaffected group of people? Well, I think we continue talking to each other. We help each other where we can. We don't give the enemy any territory or money. That's the obvious stuff. Where does that lead us? Probably not very far. So I think we need more. I think we're lacking for a solution here.
I guess I would actually make some suggestions, and I think Americans and Westerners in general can leverage this information imparted by McFate to our advantage, right? And the idea is basically making cultural content that affirms us, right? That makes us stronger. What does that mean? Is basically asserts our efforts, disrupts enemy narratives, affirms our personal narratives that buttress us, and disrupts, like, basically NGOs and stuff like that, and unmasks them as seditious or foreign elements, right? And another thing that we could do, so basically become lawyers, become journalists, create organs of informational war. And he says that the most deadly thing or decisive factor in future wars is information. So going out there and basically showing who runs, who's behind this NGO, who do they answer, what are they doing, what are their true motives, and so on and so forth. That's incredibly effective, and that's the reason why in the West we have these kind of legacy institutions that prevent outright censorship. But it's one of the reasons why American intelligence agencies leverage foreign allied agencies to kind of contradict us. So what they do is basically they launder their soft attacks, censorious attacks, by basically targeting key thought leaders or journalists and so on and so forth by, for instance, institutions like Bellingcat, for instance. And what they do is they send their foot soldiers out, journalists, and they dox you. Right, and what does doxing do? Well, doxing not only is a kind of threat to your person because it highlights you and it basically shows where you live, where you work, and then what they end up doing is a further step is allowing paramilitary groups and what we know as Antifa to either harass your place of work and deny you, your living and your wage, or to attack you personally, physically or elsewise, or just keep you scared, keep you silent, put a chill on your voice. And that's exactly how they launder all these things, by basically using proxies and leveraging them against you. But think about it this way. you can also leverage the same organs back as well, in addition to, of course, contesting institutions. So instead of seeing institutions as like groups of people, you see it as almost like hills, like king of the hill, playing king of the hill. And the closer you get and basically incorporate yourself in these institutions, the more power you're able to leverage. There's a reason why Putin has power now, is because he was part of the security state prior to the fall of the Soviet Union. The people who were not part of these, the security state or the state apparatus beforehand lost out. All the oligarchs had contacts in government. All the oligarchs had contacts with the state. And so what does that mean? That means basically not simply going for elected office, but the most important locus of power, especially in America, which even Sean McFate admits that every state has a deep state. And what the deep state is, he calls it exoticizing the definition, but the deep state is just effectively the bureaucracy, the unelected bureaucracy. And the reason why that's so effective is because there's simply no oversight as far as these bureaucracies are concerned. And certainly there's no meaningful oversight, right? And so what you need to do is institution capture. So Americans take back American institutions, like basically leveraging information, right? So basically creating and standing up press, standing up, journalists, and so on and so forth. Creating NGOs that have very specific roles. For instance, the very positive roles, right? Like just kind of highlighting problems that may be existing, or maybe holding government accountable to, let's say, like judicial misconduct and so on and so forth. And then, of course, contesting political institutions as well. And the way that you can figure out what you, legionary, can do in your life is by figuring out how best you fit in that apparatus. So, if you're a businessman, donating to these NGOs and giving so liberally. I mean, that's the thing that the left understands and we don't, is that we think we can win on a budget. There's no such thing. In war, the sinews of war are money and yet more money, right? That's Machiavelli. And ultimately, if you actually care, if you care about making sure that you have a future, and that ultimately your kids have a future, and your nation has a future, and your civilization, your God has a future, you have to fight for it. And the way you fight for it is by giving yourself 100%. And so I guess what I would try to say is this, for you legionaries out there. Figure out what you're good at. So what does this mean? Your trade, right? So your trade may be, for instance, you're a plumber, or you run a small business, or you're doing this or that or the other thing. Well, give money to NGOs. Give money to businesses who are aligned to yourself. Or if you're a lawyer, obviously give pro bono cases. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know how it works, and I'm not going to pretend I'm making myself legally liable. What I'm trying to explain to you is that you have an opportunity to leverage that skill and engage in the conflict of political victory. And then, of course, you have people that are journalists, and they should do those journalism which uncovers the power apparatus. Maybe we can expose relations between governments and individuals.
I have a good example, if I can jump in.
Please.
Yeah, I just came across this guy on Twitter the other day. Cool dude. His handle is DEI for white guys. So DEI, of course, stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion, which means the exclusion of white men. If any, half brain celled white man can put two and two together, you can see that. So this guy's got I don't know how long he's been around, but he's already got 67,000 followers. He joined 3 months ago. So he's off to a good start, but he names and shames these companies that are effectively worming this communist garbage into their hiring policies and discriminating against us white folk. So I think he does a great job. His Twitter feed is excellent, and he's got the receipts. So I think this type of work is what we need. He does it, I'm sure, anonymously, and I think that's probably prudent. So if you want to just do research, I think that's the type of stuff that I think anybody really can do without a lot of risk. And I think he's making a good impact.
No, I think you're absolutely right, and that's a great example. And there are various types too. And I think the most important thing to figuring out what is a good move is by simply matching your skill set with contending for institutions. So, for instance, there is actually a very effective narrative they've placed around dissenting opinions or people who basically don't like how things are going. They say that basically getting out of government institutions, going out into the countryside, being by yourself, in the wilderness is a winning stratagem. And that's just simply not the case. And if you can,
I can tell you from experience, it's not the case.
Yep.
I've lived in a rural area for a while, and it's good. You learn some stuff, you can survive, but you're not going to dominate. That's the long and short of it.
And I mean, I guess the reason why I say that is, like, think about it this way: your enemy has driven you out of institutions, so they control it. That's called basically capture, institutional capture. They have made you diffuse, so instead of concentrating around levers of power, they have not only driven you away, but made you like alone, isolated, right? And then, of course, they have, by proxy, basically gained a huge amount of positional advantage over yourself. So, we've tried this. These people have tried that tactic for 10 years. It clearly doesn't work, and the only way that you succeed is by contending and being so close you can hold these communists by their big star belt buckle. Okay, and the way you do that is, again, peacefully, lawfully, always within the constraints of the law. And I think that's important to note. Like, don't do anything stupid, and they're waiting for that to happen. So don't do anything stupid. Always follow the law. And especially because if you are successfully contending for the political arena, they will stoop below the law. They'll circumvent the law, do extrajudicial crackdowns on you. And that is actually a success for us, because what does that mean? It erodes their legitimacy, and it causes them to lose politically. And we gain popularity from that. So by basically simply being a good dude and following the law, but contending for those political arenas and inducing the enemy to get so desperate that they do extrajudicial actions, it only erodes and alienates the people away from them. And remember, that's what you're trying to win. You're trying to win the people, always. So always make sure you're professional, always peaceful, always palatable, so on and so forth. Adam, do you have any parting thoughts, by the way?
Yeah, I think there's a little nuance to this that is hard to maybe communicate over a podcast. But if you're living in South Chicago, I mean, I don't think you need to try to retake the streets. I think you need to get out of there. But the point, to take the opposite extreme as the solution, I think is also wrong. It's like, okay, go live in Nome, Alaska, and retake Europe. Obviously, that's not going to work either. So you have to find a balance. That's why life is hard. It's like you have these simplistic, levers that are on the opposite ends, and you're like, oh, which one do I choose? Well, sometimes it's neither. I'm not saying I have a clear-cut answer, because everyone's life is different. But what I will say is that there are pros and cons to every choice you make. And I would say measure what you do, because if you have a clear goal in mind, that means you should be able to measure it. And if you can actually demonstrably prove to yourself, at least, and then I think the next step is to others, that you're making progress, I think you got something. If, however, you are going backwards or wasting time or not achieving your goals, probably should try a different approach.
Agreed.
I think that's the sort of correct heuristic to approach life with, is like, okay, you're trying to get by, right? Okay, good. Tread water. That's step one. Step two, can you climb on a boat? Okay, good. You got that. All right. Now maybe you can go find another boat. All right, great. Well, you've got the makings of a fleet. Well, keep going, and then maybe you'll get an island, and then maybe you'll get an island chain, and then maybe you'll get a country. But you got to measure what you're doing and be honest about if it's working or not, because you're only, again, it's like, do you want to cheat? Well, you're kind of cheating yourself if you're lying about your results, because if you're going in the wrong direction, cheating only works if somebody else is picking up the tab. That's why communism doesn't work, because everybody runs out of everybody else's money. So it's common sense, number one, but geographically speaking, we need to find each other, obviously. I think co-locating is probably unnecessary, frankly, because, we have communication technology. But I think when it comes to your non-political life, as in terms of like finding a community to raise a family, I think being, check your power level, but being in a group of people that have similar values is wise. Again, like don't live in Manhattan or something and try to raise 5 kids under some kind of like moral structure. It's just not going to work. So you have to. I mean, most wealthy people who work in New York don't live there, so there's a clue, right? So these are sorts of things that I think everybody needs to sort of be honest about, and I think we'll be okay as long as we keep the spirit alive, but we also have to be realistic about what we're doing and be fact-based and numbers-based. I think that's important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think obviously everyone has their natural gifts, and I think that you have to have the judgment to understand where you fit. Obviously, I have a facility for emotions and speech, right? And so I place myself in a position where I can make the most out of my I guess, natural abilities. And obviously, I'm not the best at anything, but that is where I'm most optimal, right? And so you have to make that assessment yourself. Who are you? What can you do? What context do you have? How well are you at networking, being tactful, and being a good dude, or whatever it may be? So I guess it's very much kind of full circle. What is hybrid war? This is hybrid war. And this is precisely what the adversaries of America wage against us and what we wage against them. It is precisely why liberals are so successful, is because, first of all, they're aggressive, they're always on the offense, and because they understand how power works. And power, fundamentally, first and foremost, is always downstream from culture. So there is and what is culture, of course, is basically that philosophical, spiritual meta-narrative. And there's a reason why Karl Popper wants to destroy that, because he wants to disrupt you, right? And so the most important thing you can do is champion that ultimate meaning. So for Christians, it means asserting God. For others, it means, I don't know, your nation, whatever it may be, rule of law, something that's actually supra-individual, the strong gods. Give praise to the strong gods. Align yourself with those, and make sure that you deny your enemy theirs, right? But we'll get into this in future episodes on my own, and if Adam is willing to grace us once again, thank you so much for coming back on, Adam. I really appreciate it. Me and Sergeant Barnes have been having a great time having you on.
Oh, thanks. I had a good time.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And this is the War Room, and about hybrid war with General Lance and Sergeant Barnes and Adam Smith signing off. Oh!